Thank you, President Adrian. It gives me extraordinary pleasure to introduce Peter Darville, Professor Peter Darville, as the 2022 Monash Medal awardee. John Monash was one of our club's founding members at the commencement of our club in 1921 and became second president of this club for the 1922-23 year. On this day, 99 years ago, Sir John had just stepped down as president, and he was asked to say a few words at our club meeting on the 8th of August, so virtually this day, 99 years ago. Peter Davis has drawn my attention to the entry, the one paragraph entry in the minutes of the meeting of that day, in which Sir John was asked to give a brief account of the battle, which greatly assisted the end of the war in less than 100 days from the 8th of August. The account in the minutes goes like this. Sir John gave a most interesting address on the Battle of Hamel and spoke of the new tank that was used in this battle for the first time, and also of the new type of attack by the infantry. He described it how at 20 minutes past 4 in the morning, the Canadian and Australian troops, flanked by the French on that day, pushed forward and before nightfall broke through a frontage of the German lines 12 miles long and stood 5 or 6 miles inside the German lines. 10,000 prisoners were taken by the Australians on that day, and the biggest mobile gun captured during the war was captured by the Australians on that day. So this is a very understated account of the technology and planning involved in one of the most significant battles that changed the direction of the war. And by any measure, Sir John Monash is an outstanding Australian. We think of, particularly of his words to students, oriented towards students: adopt as your fundamental creed that you equip yourself for life, not solely for your own benefit, but for the benefit of the whole community. Our club has, since 2010, awarded the Monash Medal to an outstanding Australian for the contribution of that person to the Australian community and beyond. The criteria for awarding the medal are 3 requirements: demonstrated leadership, integrity, and service, key Monash values and values of Rotary. Peter Darville has in the last 12 months completed 50 years service under the banner of Monash. First, the university, I think 33 years at the university. You can correct me if I get any of this wrong later. Then the Monash Engineering Foundation, and then the Sir John Monash Foundation. In each of these roles, he's shown leadership, integrity, and concern for the community. He was Vice-Chancellor of Monash University from 2002 to 2003, when Richard Larkins was appointed. Prior to being Vice-Chancellor, he was the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Development and IT, a position he held from 1993 to 2003. And previously to that, he was Dean of the Faculty of Engineering. Peter shares a common area of expertise with Sir John Monash, being a civil engineer, and he's written widely on topics related to civil engineering structures. While VC at Monash, he was responsible for the renaming of the Monash Freeway from the Southeastern Freeway to the Monash Freeway. And later he supported the erection of the Sir John Monash statue, which our club also supported in a campaign led by Michael Hedbury, who is also here today as one of our guests. I could go on, but I won't. Sufficient to say, as someone who's travelled in your wake, Peter, in some of your journey, I can certainly testify your worthiness of this award and your embracing of the values that it represents. So without any further, I'd like to invite Michael Bennett to come to the stage and help the President award the Monash Medal for 2022 to Professor Peter Darville.
That's right, the Rotary Club of Melbourne Monash Medal 2022. And I'll read the citation. General Sir John Monash is the most significant Australian for his professional, military and community leadership and service before, during and after World War I. Leadership, integrity and service, core values of Rotary, integral in the life of Sir John Monash, are the criteria for selecting the Monash Medal recipient. This year, it is awarded to Emeritus Professor Peter Darville, AOFTSE, for leadership, integrity and service in his outstanding contribution through his leadership at Monash University as Vice-Chancellor to higher education research and teaching in the field of civil engineering, and to his extensive contribution to the establishment of the Sir John Monash Foundation postgraduate scholarships.
Thank you, President Adrian. Peter, thank you. You gilded the lily a bit there. And Rotarians, thank you for this great honour. I'm a bit overwhelmed, I must say, seeing how distinguished this group is, and of course knowing how distinguished the previous recipients are. Exalted company indeed, including Sir Gus Nossel, Tim Costello, Tim Fisher, Fiona Wood, others, and another engineer, John Bertrand, who you may recall did his master's degree in wind engineering under Bill Melbourne at guess which university. And we all know what came of that with the America's Cup. I too was greatly honoured to be at the ceremony at the shrine commemorating the Battle of Amiens. Let all men know that this is holy ground. This shrine, established in the hearts of men as on the solid earth, commemorates a people's fortitude and sacrifice. Let all men, ye therefore that follow, give remembrance. I find that very moving whenever I go there. The title to my remarks is in response to this award, is Shadowing the Great Man, obviously with a capital T, G and M. As mentioned by Peter Rogers, it is a source of great pride to me that I have spent 50 years, in a sense, marching under his banner. 33 years at Monash University and 17 with the General Sir John Monash Foundation, whose CEO is here today. More on that later. When I applied for a job as a lecturer in civil engineering structures at Monash in 1970, I asked my PhD supervisor at Princeton University to be a referee. He asked, "What is this Monash?" Well, simply put, I replied, he, like you and me, was an engineer, in fact, one of great distinction, and as well was a general of genius in World War I, under whom 1,000 Royal American troops fought at the stunningly successful Battle of Hamel, and the US awarded him their Distinguished Service Medal. Let me quickly sketch the evolution of the leadership of the great man, and then refer to some of my own experiences, not in the theatre of war, but in the groves of academe, or that sheltered workshop, as some refer to it. Many of you know the Monash story in detail, and if you're like me, you never tire of it. I'm going to have to skip some of this because I always write too much on this subject. He was born in Melbourne in 1865 to German immigrant parents, schooled first there, then in Jerilderie, New South Wales, and Tim Fisher would often remind us of that, and for his final 4 years at Scotch College, Melbourne. It so happens that I went to the same school, not Jerilderie, and saw his name on the honour boards and drank from the water fountain installed in memory of his grandson, John Monash Bennett, who died aged 7 from influenza or rheumatic fever. Monash was Dux of Scotch in 1881. I was not. He entered the University of Melbourne in 1882, had a very patchy academic career, having many other interests and being quite the ladies' man. He did not complete his engineering degree until 1891, 9 years later, but then rapidly added arts and law degrees and a master's in engineering. He developed considerable military leadership skills in the state and later national militia during this time and throughout his engineering career, focusing mainly on concrete structures, which it so happens became my area of expertise as well. I had entered the University of Melbourne in 1959, 2 years before Peter Rogers and Michael Hedbury were in the first cohort of students at the new Monash University, which is the first Australian university to be named after an Australian, in case you'd forgotten that. My undergraduate career was undistinguished, and I didn't develop leadership skills and supervise major projects such as the Outer Circle Railway, like Monash did while still a student. Think about that. Monash was determined to be a leader from an early age. In his diary, written at the age of 20, he records that in socialising with a friend, he makes it his a special business to show him that I still hold the upper hand. I have no doubt that the rigours and carnage of war tempered his autocratic views on leadership. But as expressed in his own book, as Corps Command, the first task as Corps Commander is to secure complete domination over the thoughts, action and policy of his senior commanders, so that they and all the men under them have a sense of responsibility to themselves, their commanders, their comrades, their men, their country and their cause. In mentioning those groups, he somewhat dilutes the rather arrogant first phrases. He distributed great quantities of maps to the troops when they were about to go into battle, and was assiduous in providing advice in the greatest of detail to all and sundry. Innovative, even revolutionary, was his policy of promotion from the ranks, giving due recognition to those who had an appetite for leadership. In his own words, from almost the earliest days of the war, violence was done to a deep-rooted tradition of the British Army, which discouraged any promotion from the ranks. The Australian Imperial Force changed all that. Those privates, corporals and sergeants who displayed under battle conditions a notable capacity for leadership were earmarked for preferment. They afforded to all its men a tangible and visible proof of the recognition of merit and capacity, and their example was always a powerful stimulus to all their former comrades. There was no officer caste, no social distinction in the whole force. In not a few instances, men of humble origin and belonging to the artisan class rose during the war, from privates to the command of battalions. The whole Australian Army became automatically graded into leaders and followers, according to the individual merits of every man, and there grew a wonderful understanding between them. I read at the ceremony at the shrine on Monday the letter that Lieutenant General Sir John Monash sent to his troops on the day before the Battle of 8th of August. And I read now only the closing paragraph. I earnestly wish every soldier of the corps the best of good fortune and a glorious and decisive victory, the story of which will re-echo throughout the world and will live forever in the history of our homeland. And so it has, and so it does. Subsequent victories of the Allied armies in the next 2 months led to the German surrender, an armistice of November the 11th. In those amazing 2 weeks of manic initiative and bravery by Australian troops, it is said that Monash fed his men on victory. For the next year, Monash oversaw the repatriation of about 200,000 AIF soldiers and arranged for all kinds of educational opportunities for them at that time. After the war, he became, as you know, the first Chief Commissioner of the State Electricity Commission, opening up the coal reserves of the Latrobe Valley to power the economic development of Victoria. He was much in demand, became president of Rotary, the Australasian Association for the Advancement of Science, the Victorian Institute of Engineers, the Wallaby Club, and sundry others. He was awarded a Doctor of Engineering by the University of Melbourne for his book, The Australian Victories in France in 1918. He also became honorary, part-time, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Melbourne. He is reputed to have said that the university is about as difficult to manage, if not more so, than an army. Well, I'm sure that Vice-Chancellors think so, but I can't think of another that has also managed an army. In the depths of the Depression, he resisted calls from right-wing groups to lead a coup against the federal government. In his much-quoted rebuttal, he wrote, "Depend upon it, the only hope for Australia is the ballot box and an educated electorate." This was integrity writ large. He was wary of politics and also famously said, "Politicians lie, even when the truth would serve them well." In 1926, reflecting on leadership to the Beefsteak Club, he said, "The capacity to form judgments rapidly and soundly is, I believe, more temperamental than intellectual. A successful leader must be unemotional to the extent of being callous to the external influences which evoke joy or sorrow, elation or despondency. He must be indifferent to praise or blame. He must have the capacity to persevere calmly and dispassionately with the business in hand. He must be patient to a degree. He must have determination and steadfastness of purpose of a very high order. He must have an exalted confidence in himself and in the correctness of his judgment, amounting to an intellectual arrogance." The most critical of all the tasks of a leader, however, he said, is the creation and maintenance of the morale of his men, infusing by example that devotion to the cause. Monash's greatest gift as a leader was to define a problem in simple terms and reduce complex difficulties into manageable problems. I also would assert that his naturally forceful style was tempered by empathy for his men. He hated the carnage and innovations to limit the frightful loss of life made him a greater leader. As he said, "I had formed the theory that the true role of the infantry was not to expend itself upon heroic physical effort, nor to wither away under merciless machine gun fire, nor to impale itself on hostile bayonets, nor to tear itself to pieces in hostile entanglements, but on the contrary, to advance under the maximum possible protection of the maximum possible array of mechanical resources in the form of guns, machine guns, tanks, mortars, and aeroplanes, to advance with as little impediment as possible, to be relieved as far as possible of the obligation to fight their way forward, to march resolutely, regardless of the din and tumult of battle, to the appointed goal, there to hold and defend the territory gained, and to gather in the form of prisoners, guns, and stores the fruits of victory. I would maintain that empathy with your troops is just as important for leaders in civilian life. Let me proffer a couple of examples of leadership and integrity from my own experience in a much more peaceful and pedestrian world. What is leadership? Wikipedia, the ability of an individual to lead, influence, or persuade other individuals, teams, or entire organizations. The leader enlists the aid and support of others in the accomplishment of a common and ethical task. Thank you. I see simply, in simple terms, that it starts from identifying that something needs to be done or should be done in a different way or better, then identifying the changes to be made, then explaining it to others, demonstrating by example, and energizing or animating others to the cause. When I was an undergraduate at Melbourne University, I have to say that it was for the most part an oppressive and demotivating experience. Some of our lecturers were inspiring, many were not, delivering their material in a take it or leave it manner. The lecture theatres were overcrowded, and we sat for 4 hours in a row in those theatres and were gasping in foul air by the time 1 o'clock came. The student cohort entered as bright and enthusiastic, but the faculty, for the most part, genuinely believed that the higher proportion of the class that failed, that proved how elite the course was. I was lucky to survive. Many of my very bright colleagues did not and became tragic wastage to engineering. I didn't realise at the time how profoundly this had affected me. When I was interviewed in 1970 for the lecturer job at Monash, I was only asked about my research, not about my liking or aptitude for teaching. I therefore enrolled in a dip ed tertiary and was advised by my head of department that it would limit my promotional prospects. A few years later, I became president of the Monash Staff Association and later of the Federation of Australian University Staff Associations, for the simple reason that I identified that some things needed to be done. By then, I had developed a taste for leadership that I had never knew I had had, and applied for and became the Dean of Engineering. I then decided, after all those years, that Monash would not oppress its students as we had been at Melbourne. We redesigned the course, making it less rigid, open to different pathways, combined degrees, and so on. And Madeline McManus is a wonderful product of all this. And always with the customer or the student in mind. Given the talent of the students, we recognise that our success could be measured by both rigour and handsome pass rates. There was some stiff opposition from reactionary professors, but we managed to overcome it. On the question of integrity, most people have it as a matter of course and practice it every day, otherwise the world wouldn't go round in a reasonably satisfactory way. You generally recognise it or are reminded of it by its absence. In the academic field, as in others, some elements are attributing to others due credit, not taking credit for what others have done. As they say, success has many parents, failure is an orphan. Not promoting others' work as your own. Presenting all information faithfully, not selectively, in order to enhance your prospects. And this one is a great and ever-present danger in academe. I refer not only to data, but to the pressure of group thought. A very painful example was that of a former Vice-Chancellor of Monash University. It turned out that in his earlier career, in his many publications, he had systematically plagiarised the work of others. He was less than frank with the Monash University Council when confronted with the first evidence, claiming it was an isolated case. Other cases quickly came to light, and the council had no choice but to ask him to leave. This man was a strong and forceful leader. He brushed aside dissent and misgivings and was given to cutting corners to get ahead. But he came undone by his own lack of integrity. Never a better example in my mind that leadership and integrity must go together. When I became Vice-Chancellor, I was asked by a journalist whether this episode had damaged the university. My reply was to ask the question, wouldn't you like your son or daughter to go to a university that had the principles and guts to sack a VC for plagiarism? We expect that the students understand and practice integrity and scholarship. This has to come from the top. Ideally, humility is also part of integrity and leadership. In the words of Rudyard Kipling, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat these two impostors just the same. There are other elements like paying respect upwards, downwards, and across. Returning to a more pleasant subject, in 2002, the General Sir John Monash Foundation was established, led by Sir Peter Gratian, who was then Chief of Army. So it came from Army, not from Monash University. It is a national scheme, not a Monash University one. Its purpose is to provide generous postgraduate scholarships for potential leaders in diverse fields, inspired by another of his famous remarks, which Peter has already recited. Adopt as your fundamental creed that you will equip yourself for life, not solely for your own benefit, but for the benefit of the whole community. You may know that Rhodes Scholars go only to Oxford. Our John Monash Scholars may go to any of the great universities of the world, depending on discipline. In selecting the scholars, we look for academic excellence, community service or selflessness, and leadership experience or potential. How similar to the Rotary values of leadership, integrity, and service. Returning to the man who inspired this gathering today and who was your second president. The legacy of John Monash is enormous. Some things are obvious, like the introduction of the technology of reinforced concrete for many types of structures, the leadership in war that generated such great national pride, the building of an economy on cheap power from the Latrobe Valley, his love of learning, of music and theatre, his cultured life, his leadership style, his principled views on citizenship. All these are legacies, so too the magnificent shrine, such a moving place to visit, and his enormous influence on the development of science and technology and on the University of Melbourne. We citizens want our country to be well-governed, civilised, prosperous, cultured, fair, and to excel in as many fields as possible. We want leaders who inspire us to achieve these things. Monash was such a man. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. In a club that does so much in so many committees, we sometimes run out of time, and we have today. So, Peter, there will be no opportunity for questions, but those who want to chat to Peter afterwards, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to them. So again, Peter, extraordinary presentation, very worthy winner, and thank you for accepting our award. Again, thank you. Thanks also to our distinguished guests who were mentioned earlier. Thank you for coming. Thanks to our MC, Peter Dakin, and to Ruth Carlos Martinez for her reflections, and also to the lunch setup team and reception team for their efforts. A reminder that next week we meet here again at number 35 for lunch. Our guest speakers will be Professor Doug Hilton, the Executive Director of WEHI, the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, and senior researcher, Dr. Danushka Marapana. Their topic will be WEHI research impact and combating malaria. Please stand and we'll close by singing the national anthem.